Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the 107K podcast. I'm Lexi Linderman.
I'm Andrew Deal.
And I'm Andrew Mercer.
Once again, a lot of recruiting news this week. That's kind of the theme of the summer. At this point, Penn State picked up two commits last Friday after we had already kind of filmed last week's spot. N.E.T. Pava from Utah and then Sean Curry, a tight end from New Jersey. They committed within an hour of each other, so really busy Friday for Penn State. But just because we haven't gotten a chance to kind of talk about them, we'll start with N.E.T. Pavia, three-star, like I said, from Utah defensive line commit under Ikaika Malloy. I'll just hand it off to you guys. What kind of stuck out to you about Pava's commitment and yeah, just what stuck out?
Yeah, it's a unique commitment, I'd say, for Penn State from what a lot of people are used to. He is from Utah, like you mentioned, Lexi, and he's the first player from Utah to commit to Penn State this century. I know I went as far back as the recruiting websites went, which I believe was 98, but I don't know further than that. Um, But it's still a really long time without a single player from Utah. And I think that ultimately shows that this coaching staff is going nationwide for these players. It's not just around the area like we've seen in previous years where it's Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Virginia, Maryland. Like those are the big states where there's commitments. This class, it's all over the place. It's all the way in Utah. Uh it's there's a wide variety of states in this class, and I think that that just shows what this coaching staff is trying to do.
What I found was interesting that the other schools that he had on his his commitment list, all from the western part of the United States. And then there's Penn State, the best team that he has on the east side, and he goes with the east. So he's traveling across the country for this one. He could have stayed a little closer to home in, like Arizona, Colorado, Oregon State. And the only other school that he had a official visit date set is still Arizona. So that's still set, says here on 24/7 that set for June 19th. So there's still, of course, the thought process of, well, what about a commitment flip if he goes somewhere closer to home? But that's the battle between East West Coast that someone from Utah is going to have to go through with the Big Ten or with Arizona.
Yeah, I think to me what stands out about Pava's commitment is just Ikaika Malloy. Kind of like I said, this is obviously his guy. Like Ikaika Malloy is someone that has only coached on the East Coast once, and it was years ago at Yale. Like he has built his entire career as a defensive line coach, as a defensive coordinator at UCLA, off recruiting these big guys from the West Coast, and Anidi Pavia is like literally exactly that. Like this guy is massive, and like he's only a three-star, but like I think as long as Ikaika Malloy is the defensive line coach at Penn State, like West Coast guys are going to be coming to Penn State just because that is where he's most comfortable recruiting. I think obviously as time goes on, as long as he's here, that he'll get more comfortable recruiting on the East Coast in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Virginia, places like that. But for right now, like all his connections are on the West Coast. They're in California, they're in Hawaii, they're in Utah, they're in Washington. And so it doesn't shock me that Penn State got a guy from Utah just because of Ikaika Malloy. I do think, obviously, in saying that this is the first time this century that Penn State has a recruit from Utah, but I'm also not really surprised at that fact. James Franklin did keep it very East Coast, like they barely even got guys from California most of the time. Darius Dixon was like one of the first ones in a while, last recruiting class or the 2025 recruiting class, that is. And so I just think with this new staff, with guys like D'Anton Lynn, Ikaika Malloy, like this is something that you're going to see more often. Um, Maybe not Utah specifically, because obviously I think BYU has a very good hold across recruiting Utah as a whole just because of Mormonism and all of that. But it is interesting to see Penn State get a guy from Utah, get a guy that kind of fits the mold of D'Anton Lynn's defensive line. But I'll hand it off to you, Deal. You looked at Pava's film. What did you kind of see from him with the X's and O's and on the tape?
Yeah, like you mentioned, he is enormous. He's listed at 6'2", 315. I believe his Instagram lists him at 6'3", 320. So either way, he's just really big. So that really stood out especially in one-on-one when he's facing high schoolers, so some of these guys aren't necessarily the biggest. And there was one specifically, this center wasn't the biggest, and he just bullied him. Um, so there is that, but then also one thing that really stood out was he ate blocks. Like he would take on double teams, he would take on triple teams, and for a Penn State defense that could have that, that would open up pass rushers to be able to have one-on-one opportunities. And with the talent at pass rusher, at the edge rusher position right now that is still pretty young, I think that that asset is pretty strong, and I think that's something that they've been trying to go for with some of the transfer additions as well. Like it's these big bodies that will eat blocks, and he's also showed that he is just a run stuffer and he'll fight through blocks, sometimes double teams, and still tackle the running back behind the line of scrimmage. And I think that is a sign of the type of player that he is going to be that run stuffing defensive tackle that will eat blocks in the passing game to be able to open it up to edge rushers, to be able to get home to the quarterback. And I think that's what Penn State is looking for in their defensive tackles now, instead of the lighter defensive tackles where last year the out of the three main defensive tackles, the heaviest one was 300 pounds. And Pava's already over 300 pounds. So I think there's a transition there with the size, and he fits that mold perfectly.
Yeah, I think like when I read in your film review that he was bigger than Zane Durant, Alonzo Ford, and Xavier Gilliam, I was like, okay, like this guy is like enormous. Like obviously the height and weight kind of tells you all you need to know with that regard, but then when you compare it to the defensive tackles that Penn State had last year that were pretty successful, obviously Zane Durant, one of the better defensive tackles to come through Penn State in recent years, and Xavier Gilliam was obviously a young talent that I think a lot of fans were excited about before he transferred to Tennessee. But there's obviously a switch in philosophy at Penn State. D'Anton Lynn and Ike Malloy, like these big defensive tackles, are good at developing them. I think with Pava, the thing that I thought about initially when I first saw was like Vita Vea, I think is one of Ike Malloy's best products in recent years besides Latu Latu, and has obviously carved out a really good career with the Buccaneers, had a really great career at Washington, and he came out of high school as a three-star and was even smaller than Pava was now in high so like in high school Vea was smaller than Pava, and obviously Vita Vea is humongous and is just a bully on that defensive line. So I think like if Malloy, I think this is like the perfect just fit for Malloy in terms of just straight like size and body composition. And then obviously, like you said, Deal, it's important to have guys that can pick up those blocks and let the edge rushers free. Because I do think maybe that was a problem for Penn State in the past with some of those smaller edge rushers. It's like obviously, or some of the smaller defensive tackles, sorry, but like when you have Abdul Carter, it kind of like masks that a little because he can kind of win against anyone. But I just think it will help when your defensive end room isn't as talented to have those bigger guys because I don't think like Yvonne Kamaju is incredible, but he's not Abdul Carter, at least yet. And so he's not just gonna destroy whoever he is again. So I think it's just important to have some other guys that are just huge that kind of draw that attention away from some of the edge rushers. But we'll go ahead and transition into the tight end commit that Penn State picked up last week as well. Sean Curry, he announced live on the Rivals YouTube channel. He picked Penn State over four other schools, I believe. I don't know all four off the top of my head, but I know Vanderbilt, Ohio State were in the mix, some other schools as well. But he heads to Penn State. He was originally committed to Virginia for both football and lacrosse, actually, and then decommitted, I believe, in March. And Penn State has kind of been going at him since then, but they end up landing him. He's the second tight end to commit in this class for Penn State, but I'll hand it off to you guys. Just kind of what are your thoughts on Curry's commitment?
Yeah. The other school that he was thinking of in the mix was Texas A&M, and that's another massive one. And so Penn State getting a commitment from him, and it's the second tight end commit in the class, with uh Cooper correct me if I'm wrong, pronouncing his name, Terwilliger.
I think it's yeah, no, that's correct. I think that's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
Cooper Terwilliger, being a four-star. So he's got the star advantage over Sean Curry, but of course that doesn't always matter in terms of player development. But Sean Curry, he is a massive individual in his own right. 230 pounds, 6'7" at the tight end position, and having that lacrosse background, he's really mobile for his size, and that could be somewhat of a point of contention of, well, he's big, but is he mobile? And that's just really what jumped out to me first was how athletic he's a freak at just how athletic he is on the football field for his size.
Yeah, I think with Curry, I think the interesting thing is he is that second tight end in the class now. Like you mentioned, they do already have Cooper Terwilliger, 4-star, one of the top players in Penn State's class, obviously as a 4-star. But I think having that second tight end is really important. I also think like you meant like we've mentioned, he did play lacrosse in high school and is a pretty high lacrosse commit or not commit, pretty high lacrosse ranking. I'm trying to figure out how to say it. Like he had,
He was
like he's
like
pretty
top 30 in the class or something.
yeah,
He was
yeah.
like he was nuts.
Yeah, so he's also really good at lacrosse. So maybe we have another Evan Royster situation on our hands here where he's always going to be overshadowed by the fact that he could be playing lacrosse. But um maybe, because I know Royster at times like the lacrosse, his friends on lacrosse team be like, come play for us. Like we'll see if the same thing happens for Curry. But
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting that he opts to go ahead and just play football instead of committing for both because like I said he did commit for both at UVA. And obviously UVA is a very good lacrosse school. Penn State also becoming a very good lacrosse school in its own right, especially in recent years. So I do think it's interesting. I wonder if it's like I obviously don't want to speculate, but I don't know if like Tambroni just didn't want it. Like I don't know. If he just decided let's play football, like let's focus on this. But I do think I think a really good get for Penn State. I think a lot of this class to me seems like they're really trying to like do what they did at Iowa State and like find those 3 stars that they think are a little higher than their star value. And I think Curry is one of those guys. But I'll hand it back off to you, Mercer, because I know you looked at his
Yeah.
film in depth. So just kind of walk us through that and kind of what you saw from him a little more in depth.
Yeah. Another thing other than just his size that I saw was how secure he is as a ball catcher. Um, and with the size comes bigger hands, and I know that's something that can help you in your schematics and how you're taking down the ball. But he can catch it from really anywhere, like out in front of him because he's got a very long wingspan. There's a lot of times where the ball will be a little out in front of a receiver that might have shorter arms, and that pass might be more uncatchable. But he's able to bring it down, and he has no problem going and scooping it with one arm on the run if he has to. So that adaptability makes him a threat when the quarterback's targeting him. And for his size, just going back to his speed, once he's got the ball and he's got nothing but green grass in front of him, he's really hard to track down. He's got a long stride, and that long stride gives him the speed that he needs to get himself into the end zone and not have somebody trailing at his feet. So that's massive for him. Also, just because if he gets the ball and there is someone in front of him, that momentum and just his build can snowball, and if he does, have to make contact, he can crash into the secondary and take some more yards, even if he goes down, because everyone's going to be swiping at his knees because there's really hard to get leverage on a guy that's just that tall and that heavy and strong. Um, Other than that, he's got really strong legs in general on his jumping game. So even being tall, if that pass is somehow even above him, he's able to jump and track that down. Safe hands, just get that 2 hands, bring it into the end zone. He's got really good skill with over the shoulder. So balls can be a little bit out more in front of him there, targeting deeper into the end zone if he's going for a corner route into the end zone for a touchdown. And finally, with his catching ability, when that ball's a little lower, since he's taller, pass might be more around his hips than always at his chest. He has no issue with bending down for that and still keeping the same kind of speed and momentum, even though the pass might be suboptimal for his size. So pair that with, you know, collegiate quarterbacks who are going to be specifically taking into account his size every time that he's targeted, and he's going to take it and run with it and dive for the end zone because he's shown that grit that he's willing to hit the turf, and he's willing to get dirty with the end of his runs if it means him getting an extra yard or getting into the touchdown, diving for the pylon. So he's shown a lot of great things, and even with Terwilliger uh, presenting that ranking recruit overall advantage, there's going to be some big competition in the tight end room with Curry.
Yeah, I think Penn State just continues to kind of recruit these tight ends that definitely have really bright futures. It seems like I think with Curry, his size is definitely something that sticks out, kind of similar to Pava, but in a very different sense. Like Curry is 6'7", 230. Like that is freakishly tall. Like I think Ben Brahmer is around there. I believe I don't like remember exactly off the top of my head, but Penn State's tight end one I think is right around that kind of height. I don't know for sure about weight, but this is just kind of like the size that you want for a tight end. Like they're supposed to be like really tall, like really big, like ready to block, like things like that. And I also just think it's really important that Penn State, I think, keeps up this like tight end run. I guess you can say that they've had. Obviously, that was under Ty Howell, but I think it's still really important because they can still kind of say like, hey, like look at this history of tight ends that we have here. Like this is where you kind of want to come if you're a tight end. And so I think it's really important that Penn State keeps that going. And so far, Taylor Mauser has done a good job at that with Sean Curry, with Terwilliger. And I just think like I think it's good that they have someone to complement Terwilliger because the tight end room like is kind of on the smaller side, I would say at this point. Like you have Brahmer, Rapley, Burkle, Alexander, and Brian Kordovich, and I believe like that's pretty much it. So I think it was important for them to get two class of 2027 guys in this class. With Brahmer, I presume leaving after next year. Rapley, I believe, still has another year if he wants it. But I do think that was important for them to get those two guys in the class of 2027. Curry still has an official visit scheduled to Texas A&M alongside Penn State. Those are the only two that he has scheduled. So Penn State might have to fight off Texas A&M a little for a little bit longer, but it definitely seems like Curry, when he put on the hat on Rivals YouTube channel, was very happy to commit to Penn State. Talked a little bit about the tight end lineage and everything, so it seems like he's really excited to be a Penn State commit. And yeah, but I do want to talk a little bit about their 2020 Penn State's 2027 class as a whole. Obviously, it is one of the better classes in the country, whether that's just because of volume or actual talent. I would lean it's more the volume side right now, but they do have a few blue chip recruits, those 4 stars, obviously that are leading the way there. But I think it's a very interesting recruiting class because I feel like it's very offensive heavy in a sense. Like there's a lot of offensive linemen, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a lot of and obviously Will Wood, and a lot of the defensive side of the ball is on that defensive line and the cornerback room. You've only got 1 linebacker commit, 1 safety commit. It's kind of like unbalanced in a sense, I would say. Like I definitely think Penn State needs to do more on the defensive side of the ball. But I'll just hand it off to you guys. Like, what are your impressions right now of how Penn State's 2027 class is coming together, and where do you think they still need to kind of plug some holes and kind of to fill this one out?
I think the consensus entering this year was this they had opportunities to have a good class, but were they actually going to have it? And they have right now a top 10 class in the country, so I think that's a good sign that it's going to end up being a good class, whether it drops off because of the volume, like you mentioned right now, with 20 guys already committed. Um, but yeah, like you said, they're lacking a little bit in the defensive side. There's only 1 linebacker commit, and I want to say it's Blake Benton.
Hmm.
Um, and other than that, there's no other linebackers committed, and I think that is something they'll be pushing for in the coming weeks. Potentially adding another receiver as well. They only have 2 receivers in this class. I'm not sure what the number typically is in a regular class for receivers, but only 2 as well. Um, and then also just added defensive backs as well. They already have 5, but most of them are cornerbacks. So getting more uh, guys in the safety room would be something to add to. But I think overall the class is really good right now. I think some of these high-end 3 stars could turn into 4 stars, and I think that's part of the whole development thing with Matt Campbell as well. Like you're gonna already see some of these guys developing into their senior year because they're taking these guys that they can see that the development is happening. And we already saw with Jameer Dean, he was a 3-star and now he's a 4-star in the composite rankings. And it seems that Penn State has fended off Georgia, that uh, the stuff going around about Dean with Georgia has gotten a lot quieter recently. So that's another big sign as well that they're fending off these SEC schools. Like they're fending off Georgia. They fended off South Carolina and a bunch of other SEC schools for Aiden Gibson. They beat out Texas A&M for Sean Curry. And I think that's a good sign for the future for Penn State in the recruiting world.
Yeah, I'm just the whole situation with Terry Smith, right? And it really helps that he stayed because, to get those cornerback commits so that the rest of the recruiting effort can go to the other positions. So they're not having to go after more cornerbacks. So more of the focus can go to a lot of the offensive skill positions, quarterback, running back, and like receiver. So it helps that Terry Smith stayed and kept those recruits so that that position can be locked down. Now, of course, with like you said, deal with more safeties are needed. But the class is really already shaping up, and you can look at it with an on-field perspective of, well, you've got your tandem at running back. Yeah, you'll need your other receiver to play one of three receiver slot positions. Um, but the main tandems in tight end and running back, and you've got the signal caller. Those are all set, and more recruits to those positions really for the position battle competition. They can be there, but I would say that they're rather optional because the focus shouldn't be there and should be, yeah, like you said, more on the defensive end. So Penn State made it up to on the composite rankings a number 5 overall rank, which is massive. I'm not sure what they were the week before, but they they've stayed in the top 10 for a while, which is huge for Campbell in his first year because, like you said, you didn't know if the recruiting was going to be the same as what it was with James Franklin because James Franklin being hailed as such a proficient recruiter. So just having a top 5 recruiting class at this stage in uh, the late spring is huge for him in his first year, just because of the implications of the future of people are going to keep recruiting or committing to Penn State should the Nittany Lions have success under Campbell in these early going years, because then it's just going to snowball. And who knows, Penn State could be that top 3 class, that top 2 class in the future, depending on the on field success.
I think for me, with this whole recruiting class, like we talked about how they've gone far and wide to kind of build it up. But to me, the concerning aspect is only having one of the top 15 recruits in Pennsylvania on board. And I know that it's really early for Campbell. He's like not really a guy that's recruited in Pennsylvania before. But the one thing that I feel like Franklin always did a good job of, not necessarily a great job of, especially in recent years, was getting those commits from Pennsylvania. Because Penn State is the school in Pennsylvania. Like, yeah, there's Pitt, like, but like other than that, it's like it's just Penn State. Like, and obviously Marcus Freeman has kind of really come in, done a really good job recruiting in Pennsylvania, kind of taken some of those top guys from Penn State. But I just think that in like as Matt Campbell moves forward, like recruiting in Pennsylvania like needs to be successful because and it's very interesting to me that the one recruit they do have from Pennsylvania is from Philly, which is like the one area that like Franklin could never get commits from. So it's like very like different in that sense. But I do think it's really important that Campbell at least knocks down maybe one other guy in Pennsylvania. Because obviously they try to get Keemon Spell. He ends up at Georgia. He's the number 2 player in Pennsylvania. But I think the one that stands out to me is Khalil Taylor because obviously he's ranked by composites number 4 player in Pennsylvania, but he's a guy that was obviously committed to Penn State before Franklin got fired in the 2027 class. Campbell's done a really good job of kind of keeping him, as a priority. He's scheduled to take an official visit, I believe, June 5th through 7th that weekend. Um, but he obviously is being pursued by other schools. I think like a lot of the intel is like maybe not in Penn State's favor. Obviously, a lot can change during official visit season, but like I think Khalil Taylor is like a guy that you like the fan base would absolutely like worship Matt Campbell if he somehow landed Khalil Taylor, and I think it would be a really important get for Penn State because then at that point you've got three wide receivers, and I believe they would all be 4 stars at that point because Blum and Dean are both 4 stars by composite, I believe. So. Khalil Taylor would just add to that. I mean, I just think it's really important that you keep recruiting in Pennsylvania because you miss out on the top two guys. You miss out on Maxwell Hiller, Keemon Spell. The third guy is still uncommitted, but I don't really think Penn State's in play. Like I think they're in play a little bit, but not like to a degree. His name's Abraham Sese, but I just think like in the future, like Matt Campbell has to recruit well in Pennsylvania because like yes, it's good to like go everywhere to recruit, but it's also really important to have like your one area where like you're like almost like automatic that like you know that you can get guys from this area if like Indiana's not working this year, you know? And so I think it's just really important for Penn State to kind of get guys from Pennsylvania, and I think that this year has kind of been not great for them, obviously, only having one of the top 15 guys in Pennsylvania on board. A lot of them are still uncommitted, but a good amount of them, like, it's kind of all over the place, too. It's not even like one school is dominating Pennsylvania. Like, Penn State's just kind of like letting a bunch of different schools like come into the state and take them out of the state. And obviously, I do think it is because Matt Campbell kind of got a slow start. I mean, and that's not his fault, obviously. It's just a situation that kind of unfolded. But I just think like I think it won't be as big of a it won't be as big of a cause for concern this class. But I think if you go to the 2028 class and and like Campbell's still struggling to recruit in Pennsylvania, that's when it becomes like a really big issue and you kind of have to really like assess like how can we like get back into the state because it is Penn State State. Like that is like should be its bread and butter. But so I think that's the one thing about this class that has kind of really I know stood out to me. I think I've seen some fans kind of talking about it and how it's kind of something that they've been a little concerned about. And I also think the other thing about this class is the lack of edge rushers. I know Penn State has 3 defensive line commits, but no like true edge, I believe, based on what I looked at today. And I think like they have to get one. Like I just think that it's really important for them to get one. I know I do not want to botch this, but I'm going with Ifani Emidobi. We're gonna say that. Has Penn State in his top four. He's an edge rusher from Indiana. Penn State's in his top four alongside Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan. So they obviously have 3 other Big Ten schools to kind of beat out there. But I think that would be an absolute huge get for Penn State. A 4-star edge rusher on board would be really big for this class. Um, but I think you're at the point where you just kind of need to get an edge rusher and you kind of just need to like really just fill out the class. Like I just think it's like kind of like we talked about like safety, like linebacker, like there's just some places that like Penn State's really lacking and other places where they're really excelling. And I think it kind of needs to become a little more even across the board. But otherwise, I think Campbell's obviously done a really good job having the number 5 class at this stage is obviously really incredible considering, you know, the slow start that he was forced to have. But I think it's a matter of whether, you know, he can maintain that because obviously with some of these, like when you're recruiting at Iowa State and you pick up a 3-star, like other schools aren't like, oh, I wonder if this guy's like actually like secretly like better than his ranking. But when you pick up a guy like that at Penn State, like Georgia's gonna notice and Georgia is gonna be like, oh, like let's take a look at Jameer Dean. Like let's see like what did Penn State see in him? And so I think that's another thing that Penn State's going to have to deal with a lot is fending off some of the other schools that obviously compete with Penn State with recruiting to kind of make sure they don't flip any of these guys that Matt Campbell has on board. But I think as long as like they kind of keep this up, they should be okay. I just think Pennsylvania is the one thing that they really need in at least next year to like really do better at. So.
Yeah, and the entering this recruiting cycle with the 2027 class, it was kind of known that this Pennsylvania class in general was stronger than what it typically is.
Mhm.
And the fact that there's right now one out of the top 15 is going to Penn State is a concern. And Now there is Cleo Taylor, who could end up at Penn State. And you also mentioned edge rusher, and you also did mention Abraham Sese, who is an edge rusher in Pennsylvania. Now it's not trending towards Penn State, but like he's like there, right there in the home state, and it may not end up with him going to Penn State. So I do think that is a bit of concern. Something that also stands out is the number of times the entire one side of the ball coaching staff is visiting a player's home. So like we saw it with Will Wood, all of the positional guys were there. And then we also saw it with I was blanking on his name earlier, and now I am again. Deshaun Hall from Alabama. The entire offensive coaching staff was paid a visit to him, and I think that shows that they are really making a push for those type of players when they're sending the entire coaching staff there, and it would add to the kind of nationwide outlook on this recruiting class because he's from Alabama, and that would once again be going out of the state, but he's a very talented, very big receiver, and would add to that four-star receiver room in this class.
Yeah, I think because if you don't end up with Taylor, like getting Deshaun Hall, I think at least masks that a little bit because it's like, oh, like we didn't get this four-star receiver that was right in our backyard, but we do get this four-star receiver from Alabama, and we beat out Alabama to get him. So like there is that where if you do end up with Hall instead of Taylor, like you're not really like crying yourself to sleep, like that's whatever. But I just think, like obviously, like you said, dude, like this Pennsylvania class is incredibly good. Like it is really, really, really good. Especially compared to past years. Like the top two guys obviously are Maxwell Harris and Keemon Spell, and they're both 5 stars. And it's like how like that's really rare where like two recruits in Pennsylvania are at that 5-star status. And obviously Penn State was in on both of them. Maxwell Hiller a little like definitely not as much after Franklin got fired, but and they lose on both of them, and obviously Phil Troutwine ends up with Maxwell Hiller at Florida. So obviously like Penn State, that's one of those guys where like, well, maybe if Penn State doesn't fire James Franklin, he's at Penn State, but like at the end of the day, like whatever, it's not that big a deal. So like I just think this in the future like Penn State does need to do well in Pennsylvania, because I don't know if this like nationwide approach is gonna work forever. It's just really tough to like truly go like across the country for your recruiting class. Like I know we talked about, or like I talked about how Ikaika is gonna bring in those guys from the West Coast because that's where he has his connections. But I think it's equally important that he starts building those connections in Pennsylvania. Because obviously a lot of the guys that Penn State has sent to the NFL in recent years are from Pennsylvania. Obviously Nick Singleton is probably the most recent example that comes to my mind where he was one of those top recruits in Pennsylvania and Penn State lands him. And obviously the rest is history. So I just think it's really important for Penn State to get those recruits in Pennsylvania. Do I think it's going to happen this year? Like, not necessarily. But I just think like if we go to 2028 and the same issue is going on, then that's where you kind of have that cause for concern. So.
In the age of NIL stuff, where this becomes less of a concern of like players staying close to home, um, there's still that to think about when you go across the country of, well, that's a factor that could make a person's decisions. Well, my family can come out here. But I I'm again iffy like you are with the nationwide approach because it can be good. You grab people who are going to fit the scheme regardless of location, but there's just a matter of security in which the proximity to home is a factor, and having people in Penn State and having those connections um in Pennsylvania can just be another like feather in the cap of, well, we have this advantage on the rest of the teams that are going out there and trying to recruit for that player. So that's just what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I also think you mentioned being close to home. I think we saw this spring with Chaz Coleman, who transferred from Penn State to Tennessee, that he has been homesick, kind of away from his family, been dealing with some mental health stuff regarding that. I believe didn't have the best spring while he was dealing with that. But I think that's just one example that kind of shows you like these are like kids that like obviously they're being treated like pro athletes at this point. I don't think anyone can deny that, but they're still 18 years old. Like they still love their parents and their family. And like I know it was important for me when I chose a college that I wasn't going to be a flight away from my family. And so I think that it is a factor, in recruiting, like being close to home. And so like you said, Mercer, like the nationwide approach, like how long, like how like at that point, like you're really like how much is I'm trying to like figure out where this like how much of it is like, hey, we'll pay you $1 million to like come play here and you are a 5 hour flight from your family compared to like a Pennsylvania dude who is maybe even better than someone across the country and you can it's a lot easier, because you can literally be like, look, you're 3 hours from your family. Like, but I do think the other thing is like I think the important thing with Matt Campbell too with recruiting at Penn State is that he at least knows how to recruit to a place that's in the middle of nowhere. Like I think that that's also like something that's important because like a lot of these places that Penn State goes up against, it's like, well, you kind of like have more to like do. Like there isn't like a ton to do at Penn State, but then there's also the flip side where it's like, well, since there's nothing to do, like all you get to like you just get to play football. Like that's what matters. Like that's number one. Like so. But I do think it's good that Matt Campbell has that experience because Amy's is kind of like Penn State in a sense where it's just literally in the middle of nowhere. Um, at least like Penn State, you can drive 2 hours and get to Pittsburgh. But I do think that it is important for Penn State to kind of sell themselves to these Pennsylvania recruits because they kind of have to resell themselves in a sense because Franklin like eventually just had it like he knew everyone across the state. Like this was like he knew how to recruit in Pennsylvania well. It doesn't mean that Marcus Freeman couldn't come in and steal a bunch of guys from him like he did, but I do think like Matt Campbell definitely needs to build those relationships like sooner than later. Because I think in the long run it'll just be good for Penn State as a whole in order to keep this kind of recruiting pedigree, up in the top five, pretty much. So. That's all we have for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. For more football coverage, you can find us at pcucollegian.com. Make sure to follow us on socials and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for content curated to your inbox every Friday. But that's all we have for today, so we'll see you next time.